This is a story about a modern man named Max, who got into a world where the most important thing is martial arts. But so far from normal survival, he has absolutely nothing, either superpowers, nor a system that could help him on this difficult path. On the background of such a difficult life situation, our hero was forced to become an ordinary servant in the village of Lanshan, eat all kinds of garbage, and tolerate all kinds of abuse of himself. But this day, surprisingly, his partner behaved quite respectfully. Since Max got here, 3 years have already passed, and all this time life was simply not human. Even his previous 997 days were better than now, when the guy lived in his usual world, went to an unloved job, and constantly listened to the dissatisfaction of his superior. The only difference between Max and everyone else who gets into the other world is that they necessarily have some cheater abilities, and our hero has only one ability: days at a stretch peeling potatoes, with a small lunch break. As nothing changed from day to day, our hero began to think that the best option for him would be to simply eat nothing, and wait for the day when he finally lost his life due to severe hunger. That way he could get back to the new world and have a chance at a normal life with a normal family. One afternoon the boys were sitting in the shade having lunch, and a conversation started between them about the food they had been brought today. Because of the fact that his partner was very cunning, he began to tell Max that the chicken in these parts was poisonous, and it was better to give it to him, because he had resistance to poison. But our hero is not as stupid as one might think at first glance. At least he knows that chicken can become poisonous only because of heavy metals, and since there is no heavy industry here, there is no place for poison in cinnamon. So he just ignored his partner and continued eating. Suddenly, a new system notification appears right in front of the guy's eyes, in which he was offered to share meat with his friend and thus fulfill his dream of eating more than usual. Not thinking long, the guy agreed, because he was already in anticipation that after that he will have a personal system. In the end, for his generosity, Max finally got the opportunity to use the system. Frankly speaking, he just could not believe his eyes, because this event directly symbolizes that this is probably the end of a poor life, and he did not in vain so hard work so many years. Because of strong emotions, the guy started crying right in front of his partner, but of course he could not say what the real reason for these tears was. In any case, the comrade was not confused, tried to support Max, and said that in the near future he would treat him to a very tasty dish. When the late night came, the guy decided to understand his new system in more detail. After the first successfully completed task, one experience point was added to the item called innate potential. To move to the next level specifically in this parameter, you need to collect 9 more such points. Also, our hero noticed that over time the feeling of heaviness in his head began to weaken, the pain in the muscles of his body decreased, and his mind was not as slow as before. Apparently in this world, one of the main parameters is innate potential, because when it's good, that physical abilities, natural data and intelligence will be high. Deep down Max realized that in everything that happened, there was a merit of Victor, so it would be nice to meet him, to talk and somehow thank him for the accidental help provided. To do so, he asked his colleagues where his comrade was, but the answer was something he never expected. As it turned out, Victor had ducked to the head of the hall, and now he occupied a new position, called the attendant disciple follower. It is someone who serves the official disciples. Also, a man in that position would no longer have to do the dirty work that Max does, and get to see people at a higher level. Then the guys were abruptly informed that it was time to eat, and they ran straight to the table to try to eat as much as they could. Surprisingly for everyone, Max was the first to arrive, all thanks to the fact that his thinking and reactions had become sharper. Even getting food was easier now. Increasing his innate potential was probably the best thing this system could do. The main thing was not to stop and keep going. In the end, right during the meal, the guy gave away his meat to everyone under the pretext that he did not like it. Thanks to this, he gradually began to earn universal honor, and in parallel in the system for good deeds received precious points, for which he will get something more useful than just meat. But closer to the evening, our hero was in tears, because for giving away more than 20 chicken pieces of meat, received only 1 point. Of course, such a weak result will not change anything in his life, but only can lead to the deprivation of life because of severe hunger. Victor suddenly appeared on the horizon, in a completely new uniform and with a huge tasty chicken in his hands. He got the information that Max had given away all his food, but he himself remained hungry. In this case, his comrades simply could not leave him in trouble, and at his own risk brought more food. He has also noticed how everyone else has started to be hypocritical and treat him very well, though they have been bullying him from the beginning, and now they are sucking up to him and trying to please him in every way possible. It's not hard to guess that they are doing all of this solely to get a tasty meal. But no matter how hard they try, no one will get the chicken except Max, because he is the only real friend who can be genuinely happy for Victor, and wish him only the best. If in the end, he still manages to become an official student, then he will be able to live happily every day. In response to all these favors, Victor told me that in fact it's not as simple as it may seem at first glance, because if someone does not work hard enough, he will be kicked out of the main hall almost immediately, so the main thing in this case is not to relax. For example, it is even more difficult for the older pupil Yura, because his father and teacher manage the hall, and in case of any defects, he is reprimanded by both of them at once, and then as a punishment he is forced to rewrite books. Even now it is night outside, and he is forbidden to go to bed until he completes the work. After this story, Max remembered that all his conscious life has been doing only that rewriting books. He hates it so much that he would rather peel potatoes than sit and do endless, meaningless writing. At one point, the system sends a new notification, in which it informs that books are ships of wisdom, and asks if the guy would like to take the initiative to rewrite a whole book and send it to someone who needs it, for a certain reward in the form of experience points. In such a case, it radically changes the situation, and Max suddenly becomes not against such a job. Initially, it is necessary to agree with someone to get to this position, so, without thinking long, the guy immediately turned to Victor with a request for help. The plan was for Max to meet Yura and offer to help him write books for free on his own initiative. In that case, don't waste a minute, the guys went to visit him at once, and to be frank, they were simply shocked by the screams that came from there. In general, Yura was quite surprised to see the guests at such a late hour, so he warned Victor that he should rest before tomorrow, and that he did not need to accompany anyone in the middle of the night. Of course, the assistant was already aware of these rules, but this time he had come for a slightly different reason. When Yura listened to them, he didn't take the idea seriously at all, because he couldn't even imagine how an ordinary servant would rewrite books, and besides, if the handwriting was wrong, the teacher would definitely find out about everything and it would be a real disaster on a global scale. Since the guys were well aware of all the risks, they kindly asked to at least try to write a few words, and to see if Max's handwriting would really fit. In that case, Yura decided not to resist and invited the guys to his house, but warned them in advance that if anything went wrong, the guy would be sent to live in another, less prosperous place. After a few minutes, Yura finally decided to check how much their handwriting was similar. The first question after checking sounded something like this: "Did you write this?" The text was so very similar that the young gentleman didn't even realize at first where his text was and where someone else's was. He was so overjoyed that he immediately ran to embrace the boy, for in his opinion it was simply divine work and a new talent had been found among the servants. In his defense, the boy said that his godfather was a fortune teller, and he helped him to rewrite the amulets, and so he learned. In general, the abilities of our hero in this regard are so unique that in his school years, he forged the signatures of his parents on all exam papers. As a result, the work was done in the shortest possible time, and most importantly just perfect. Max got his precious points, and was no less pleased than Yura. Also for the work done, the young master wanted to thank the guy and brought him 5 tons of silver. In fact, for Max it was a huge sum, but apparently Yura did not think so, because he said that at the end of the month he would have money and he would add another 5 tons of silver. When the guy heard this amount, his eyes began to shine like never before, From now on, the young gentleman looks in Max's eyes as a source of infinite wealth. The main thing is to keep being forced to rewrite books like this. Then the system sent our hero a new notification, in which it informed him that a real man treats money like dirt and nothing more. In this case, for the sake of the system, Max decided to refuse the payment, and argued that he just madly respects Yura and in general has always dreamed of getting to know him better. In the end, a great man who is completely open, honest, and not interested in monetary gain is rewarded with 2 more points. Yura was so impressed that he promised that he would never let the guy suffer a loss, because he has a few dozen other brothers who are just like him suffering from the census book. Now, if Max wants to make a good living, he knows where to go. As it was starting to get light, Yura ordered Victor to find some easy work for the boy, and to wait for good news. From that day on, his main job was just to watch the others work, and push them around if necessary. Also from that moment on, everyone who bullied Max abruptly started respecting him and sucking up to be on good terms. From the outside it was so obvious that it was even disgusting. The guy hadn't encountered such an easy job in a very long time, so it was even kind of embarrassing for him. Since there was nothing to do, roughly speaking, the guy thought that the best option at the moment would be to try to study his system in more detail, namely to try to use a unique skill called the Great River to understand what it is and how it is useful. The practitioner's strength is divided by rank, the first rank being the lowest, higher the second, third, and so on. A person's innate potential directly affects the development of the next rank. For example, if our hero has been working in rotten mud all his life, then this is his potential. His next stage will be called rotten wood. Only when one already has the innate potential of an ironwood tree can one be considered to have entered the path of cultivation, and there are limitations there as well. The main problem is that most cultivators throughout their entire lives cannot even break through to the first rank realm. Further above the innate potential of the iron tree there is the silver flower potential, which allows cultivators to easily break through the narrow neck of the first rank boundary. If one cultivates diligently, and is aided by the secret pill technique, one can even break through to the third rank. Above the silver flower is the potential of the golden flower. Possessing it, the path to cultivation becomes as smooth as a cloud. It is usually possessed by great masters, and they are quite few. After the golden that comes white jade. It is considered to be as rare as possible, and not everyone will be able to at least once meet such a powerful person. It is also said that there is a more precious innate potential in the world, but it is only legendary. The Great River skill itself empties the mind and calms the spirit. Usually aggressive masters copying the Great River method become more and more fatigued because it is simply difficult for them to be calm. If Max really wants to become a first-rate martial artist of the first rank, then in addition to innate potential, he also needs his true chi to reach a certain thickness, and our hero still has a long way to go. Suddenly, right in the middle of practice, someone came to the guy. Because of the effect of the surprise, the guy was rather frightened, but the man named George quickly calmed him down. In general, he came here to ask Max for help, because he has no one else to turn to. From his actions we can assume that the problem is really serious. In such a case, the guy simply could not refuse, asked the man to calm down, sit down next to him and tell him about his problem in detail. In short, George may be kicked out of his job, and if it really happens, he will just be left on the street, because he has no property. Also, to add motivation to Max, Grandpa decided to give him all his savings, namely 200 coppers. Realizing the situation in which George is, he simply could not accept this money, so he refused and said that he could talk to the young master without any payment. But even despite the guy's reluctance to take the money, George did not hesitate to put it in his hands, and immediately ran off in an unknown direction, saying that Max just had to help him. By the way, as for his age, the man runs quite fast. It can be recorded as an argument in his defense. When it was time for lunch, the guy was a little anxious, because usually Victor always looks for him to eat together, but this time for some reason he didn't come, in case something happened. As suddenly the guy heard the guys talking among themselves about some terrible topic, namely as if someone had lost his life. He then rises abruptly from the ground and walks over to the guys to find out more details. In general, there are rumors that Victor was returning home to find young Mr. Yura, and suddenly spat out a mouthful of black blood, after which he fell to the ground and never moved again. After hearing the story, our hero was in a state of shock. He just stood there, looking at one point, and thinking that could it be that the chicken was really poisonous. Then some man came up to him from behind and gave him a powerful blow with a stick right on his back, after which Maxim fell to the ground. Within 20 minutes, Max was tied to a wooden pole and accused of defrauding George's grandfather of 200 copper coins. If the guy admits his guilt right now, the maximum that he will do is to break both legs and throw down the mountain. Also, this sentence is valid until the head of the hall has arrived. In the case of pulling up to this point, then the chances of survival will be definitely no more. In his defense, Maxim said that he had not taken even 1 coin from his grandfather, let alone 200, and he also demanded some proof that it had really happened, because you cannot judge a person by such cruel measures, without real reasons for it. But in response to this quite logical proposal, the guy only heard that he was nothing and had no right to bark at a superior person. At the same moment, Richard in his head was thinking about how to destroy the competitor as soon as possible, because he was 100% sure that instead of Victor, Max would be hired. Meanwhile, the head of the audience hall, Stanislav, finally showed up at the punishment site, along with 2 young warriors. When ordinary workers met him, they immediately stood at attention, because the head was such a man that he could just point his finger at someone and that person would be fired at best. Richard at once bowed before him, and began to report that the servant Maximus had used the young gentleman's name in order to extort money from his colleagues, also adding that he had irrefutable evidence, and demanded that he should take his life, without any unnecessary trial. In such a case, the head showed great interest in the evidence, because he cannot make such a hard decision without a real reason. In response, Richard introduced George, the very victim from whom Max had allegedly extorted money in exchange for not being kicked out, using the young gentleman's name as a cover. After hearing the story, Stanislav immediately made several conclusions for himself. The first is that the amount of 200 coins sounds ridiculous for this kind of service, and the second that most likely everything was the opposite. Richard had bribed Max to his grandfather, specifically to catch him in the act, and to get a chance to become Yura's assistant. And so, in case after the search the money is really Max's, the head will certainly destroy him, because it will confirm the fact that he is prone to bribes, and Richard will live, because despite his lies he accidentally recognized the bribe taker. But if the money could not be found, those who had made this mess would be in trouble. While everyone was waiting for the results of the search, Max turned to his grandfather and asked why he had slandered him, and how he was going to live with such a heavy sin on his soul. It's really as simple as that. George realized that after Victor lost his life, Max couldn't help him at all, because he had no influence on Yura. The best option to save himself and his place at work was to just set the guy up, earn 200 coins on it, and get sympathy from his elders. Meanwhile, in the medicine room where Victor was lying, a miracle happened. He finally woke up after being unconscious for a long time. By the way, he felt as good as possible, and at times it even seemed to him that his body had more energy than before. The doctor describes the situation as follows. Originally Victor's body had some congenital poison, then probably by mistake he took some more poison. As a result, one poison eliminated the other poison that had been in him all these years and came out with the blood. That's how unpleasant the procedure turned out. A little reasoning, Victor realized that he couldn't get poisoned anywhere, except after eating chicken, which he had eaten together with Max. In that case it was so, because chicken meat itself could not be highly poisonous, but it turned out to be the opposite of the poison that was in the guy's body. In general, from that moment on, Maxim could be called a real savior, because if it were not for him, there is no telling at what point Victor's health would have deteriorated. When all the medical issues were solved, the assistant immediately turned to Yura with one request, but so far he had no idea what was going on outside. The request was to give old George some work, because some of the guys were trying to kick him out of here, and were doing their best to do so. In principle, Yura understood the situation and said that he would find a job for him in the yard without any problems. Then he suggested to go to Max. In the meantime, a reconnaissance team had finally arrived at the place of punishment to report the information they had gotten from the last trip. Richard was already in anticipation that right now, the head would give him the order to take the boy's life and his goal would be accomplished. But luckily not this time. The assistant had searched the whole house and did not find a single copper coin. Richard couldn't believe his ears, so he went straight to Max and asked him where he had hidden all the money. Instead of answering the thug, Max stated that he had a complaint and said that the whole thing was actually set up on purpose, so it was only fair to also search Richard and George's houses, in case the money was still in their homes and not just hidden somewhere. Despite the fact that the head is very tough, he is first of all very fair, so he listened to Max's words and ordered the guys to search these two houses, and only after that to make some conclusions. Of course, the old man and Richard did not like it at all and they immediately began to express their discontent. But it's all right, soon the truth will come out, and the real bandits will get what they deserve, and especially Max wants to put the old man in his place as soon as possible, because he could not even think that George once caused him such trouble, just to try to save his skin. Even when the old man left the money and ran away, the guy was still sitting and thinking about how to return it later, because he understood very well what hard work they are extracted here. Then the system sent him a new notification, which informed the guy that with this case it is better not to delay and return them at once. Because it is not right to take the last thing from people when they are in such a difficult situation. In the end, in order to get the glasses, Max immediately put the money in his pocket and secretly went to George's house to return it and forget about this situation like a bad dream. As soon as the assistant came back, he immediately reported that the bag of money was found on a blanket in the old man's room. He also confirmed that there were exactly 200 copper coins lying there, and each of them was labeled with the owner's marks. Now George finally realized why the guy was so confident, and almost fainted from shock. Then Yura and Victor finally arrived at the place, and they immediately reported that at least for the time being George would not be kicked out anywhere, because the young gentleman had agreed to let him stay and clean his yard, whereupon they discovered that the head of the hall was here and immediately dodged him. When Richard realized that the matter smelled fried, he immediately fell on his knees and began to beg forgiveness, justifying himself by saying that this old brigand had come to him with a complaint, and he only wanted to judge justly, so he caught Max, and almost immediately set the process in motion. Afterwards he began to threaten to destroy the old man, so as to close the subject, but Stanislav urged him to stop, and start behaving like a normal person, not to make any hasty decisions. At this time Victor was already taking care of his comrade, and was giving him first aid. As soon as the situation was fully organized, Maxim was handed a sword as compensation for the inconvenience, and told that now he could decide the fate of the old man, for example, to destroy him, or to let him live, or to do everything very slowly and painfully, to take revenge. The old man began to ask for mercy, and talk about the fact that Max should not dirty his hands, but what George did cannot be justified, because if something went wrong, our hero would be deprived of life without a second thought. When our hero didn't hear a single really worthy excuse, he just did his thing, and that was the end of the story of this conflict. After that, the system sent him a new notification informing him that Max had succeeded in seeing the man off on his last journey, and put him out of his earthly misery forever, for which he received 3 experience points to increase his personal characteristics. In principle, the chapter like that at least there was not much blood. From today Max will become a guardian of the servants' hall, and tomorrow he will go on patrol together with a group of other guards. Yura, on the other hand, was asked by his father to come into the office to talk to him personally one-on-one. At that time Victor advised not to take the situation too seriously, because in fact, Max was shocked to lose his life, so George got what he deserved and there was nothing more to think about. In fact, Max was not primarily concerned about the old man, but how dangerous this situation was, Of course, today he was lucky and justice was served, but whether it will happen next time no one knows, so you need to be as careful as possible. As they say, an eye for an eye, blood for blood, these are the rules of the world. Max just has to become stronger, and has no right to lose a minute. After a certain period of time, our hero has already become a full-fledged guardian. He was given a special uniform, a sword, and paid a monthly fee for service. The relationship with Victor is also on the heights, but Max has another good friend, who is an escort and constantly goes with him on patrols. Everyone in this district call him affectionately Puppy, because he himself is very small, and does not pose much of a threat. When the guys called him to his place, they noticed that he literally has no face, and immediately asked what happened to him, because in addition to the fact that he is sad, on his back is still weighing a heavy bag with a lot of things. It clearly indicates that the guy is going somewhere distant way. In general, as it turned out, the puppy's village has been robbed for many years by mountain bandits, and this year the epidemic has raged, and in the end it turned out that because of all these troubles, his parents lost their lives, so he wants to return to bury them properly, and to be able to come to the grave. After hearing this sad story, Max decided to give the puppy 200 copper coins so that he could make normal coffins for his family. Then a new notification appeared in front of his eyes, in which the system offered to give all his personal savings, so that the puppy's relatives could rest in peace. In which case Max took the boy by the shoulder and said that he was just insanely touched by the story, so in addition to those 200 copper coins, he wants to give him 2 lennies of silver, and make the best funeral for his parents with the best graves. The saddest thing was that Max had just received this money, it hadn't even warmed up yet, and he was already giving it away, but in any case it was a task from the system, so there was no point in regretting it. For such a good deed, he immediately received 3 points to increase his personal levels. In general, initially from this money, Max wanted to treat his friend to a delicious dinner, but something went wrong. To be honest, Victor could not even think that after the incident with the old man, the guy would continue to help other people so much. Certainly the situation with the grandfather is quite a strong argument, but do not because of one person to put a cross on all at once, because there are a lot of good people in the world, as well as bad. For the few days that the guy was at work, the puppies served him faithfully, and also took care of all sorts of little things. In fact, he's a very smart and perceptive kid. How can you not help someone like that? Before he left for the hike, the puppy kneeled down and began to shout that his life was cheap. He would pay Max back for his help, even if he had to pay for several lives in a row. Well, it's safe to say, this time the guy sure helped the right person. When the subject of the puppy was closed, Victor said that today he had something very good to tell Max, but before he did, he had to follow him to a certain place. Unfortunately, it turned out to be not a pleasant surprise, but another job with rewriting books. But the peculiarity of this evening is that it is necessary to rewrite the book not only for Yura, but also for all his brothers. To speak frankly, the amount of work is just huge and everything should be done in one night. But even despite such short deadlines, Max declared with fire in his eyes that he would definitely do everything, and in no way make Yura blush in front of his brothers. Now the most important thing is to figure out how to start writing faster, otherwise it's just a matter of time before morning. If Max's reasoning is correct, you can try to use the skill of the great river to apply the true chi to your hands. According to the idea, it should increase the efficiency of work. As they say, it is better to try once than to think 100 times, so let's see in practice what will come out in the end. In the end, as it turns out, it does work. With true purpose, the guy can rewrite books faster and faster. The work was done for the day. Max was able to set a new personal record and rewrote as many as 5 copies in one night, which is amazing. Also, for the perfectly done work, the guy received the promised payment, in the form of 1 gold coin and praise personally from Yura, because in his opinion Max is a real talent, and he can really admire even such high-ranking people. Just a few days of rewriting books, our hero managed to earn not only a few dozen liang silver, but also to move to the next level of innate potential and improve the skill of the river to a heavenly level. The growth is right in front of your eyes and it just cannot help but be happy. But still there is still someone who strives, because Max's use of chi is still too crude to learn how to control it properly, and he needs to learn some martial arts. But the problem is that in the villa martial arts can only be learned by official students. The next day, our hero went to a town called Wuha. He was surprised, to say the least, at how lively it was here, and by the way, it was the first time he went down to the mountains so low. As suddenly on the way, Max noticed a man who was on his knees in the middle of the street, and tried to sell his daughters for some pennies. Unfortunately for this kind of goods, very rarely there is a demand from really rich and serious people. Mostly some gangsters come up, offer for one daughter, a couple of pampushkas, and thus get for themselves real slaves who will fulfill all requests for food. According to the businessman, he was selling his daughters for the reason that he could no longer provide for them, and if the next few days the deal did not take place, they would simply lose their lives due to severe hunger. Since Max is a very kind soul, he just could not pass by, and decided to help this poor man with his children somehow. For starters, he bought a couple of pampushkas, put them in a bag, and added some money to it, so that the family would have enough for the first time and the father could look for a job. The guy even gave him a few options. The man started to cry a lot, because he could not believe that someone had really helped them until the last moment. As a result, for the fact that Max saved a poor family, he received 2 points, either much nor a little, but in any case pleasant. Further, the guy decided not to stop there, and immediately went to help other homeless people. For some reason in these parts they turned out to be just countless. When an entire neighborhood was completely saved, Max managed to earn 22 points for all his good deeds. Who would have thought that he would be able to earn so much? But on the other hand, it is not surprising, because in this chaotic world where the strongest survive, the life of ordinary people is too hard, and there is always someone to help. But let's not get sad, because right now our hero is about to put all his points into his innate potential, and he should feel a tremendous boost in strength. But as soon as Max wanted to do that, the system sent him a new notification that put. It's frankly most frustrating, because the guy doesn't even know how he can legally begin to learn martial arts. At the same time, some guys were watching him from the side. Since they couldn't see the system window, they couldn't understand what he was doing, so they assumed that he was just some sick person. It was just perfect to approach unnoticed and squeeze more money. In the meantime, Max had made a firm decision that from today he should go to the nearest martial arts school and enroll there as an official student to get the legal right to study martial arts, and thereby be able to improve himself in the future. When he went inside, he was a bit surprised, because he couldn't understand why the martial arts school was so dark. From the outside it looked more like a haunted house. But even with all these nuances, the guy still went on and was able to meet the head of the school to further sign the deal. Before starting to agree on anything, the master asked his students to come into the main hall and greet the newcomer. Then the atmosphere changed dramatically, and in principle it was not so scary to be in the hall, and even it was calm. When the greetings were over, the master turned to the young warrior and asked him what martial arts he wished to learn. Max then asked a question in return, to find out what martial arts the school could teach. In general, in this school, there are all 18 types of weapons. There are training true chi, as well as make steel muscles, and do not charge extra tuition. Then the master asked his students to demonstrate what they have already learned, for a short period of training here. In this case, the guys immediately began to demonstrate, but frankly speaking, their skills left much to be desired, and Max began to seriously think that the best option for him at the moment would be to just leave, not to take up his and others' time. After an hour, when the students were finally tired, they finished their performance, and already lying on the floor asked the guy what kind of martial art he liked the most. In response, Max carefully scratched his head, and said that probably will refrain from starting training for the time being. Such an unacceptable answer did not please the master, because how could one look at it for such a long time and then say that you don't want to learn? Does Max regard all this as some kind of free entertainment? In general, From the outside, it looked like the school was trying to recruit students by force. Then the master calmed down a bit, and also told him that here the guy can sound musical instruments, cooking, or foreign languages. As suddenly the system sent him a new notification, which informed him that this school is under great pressure, they have no funds, and to pay off, you can leave a small donation. At this time the master again began to ask his pupils to continue in the same spirit, and to show the young warrior something else. Then the boy realized for himself that it was definitely time to finish, and informed the master that among all that he had seen there was nothing suitable, apologized for the trouble, and gave him a small compensation. Max got 2 more experience points for this good deed, which was quite a favorable exchange. But despite the fact that the boy had already paid him off, the master still asked him to stay, and ordered all the students to leave the hall to talk to him one-on-one. The name of this master is William, and he has already realized that Max has a rather sharp eye and he can't be fooled by some demonstrations for outsiders. In general, in fact, this school has one unique technique, which is worthy of the guy's attention, and he will definitely want to learn it. It sounded quite intriguing, so Max was interested and asked for a demonstration before he could think about whether or not it was worth learning. Of course, William immediately agreed and immediately started the demonstration. The essence of the skill is to dial sand in his hands, and with the help of energy to throw it exactly in the specified target. In the trailer, the guy was not very surprised, because in his opinion throws sand only when they know for sure that they cannot win in a fight, and it is quite difficult to call it a powerful skill. The master asked the boy what he knew about hidden weapons, before going on to tell him what they were. In response, he started naming rather trivial items, like throwing needles, shurikens, or darts. Of course, he was right about some things, but not always in battle. Such items could be used discreetly. Now it was time to look closely at the mannequin and pay special attention to the eyes, to understand what the most ordinary sand in a bundle of internal energy was capable of. The face was completely covered, with small pits, as if someone had poked with some sharp object. In this case, the guy was very excited and said he was ready to learn the technique, but before he started, of course, he asked the price. Since William is a very cunning businessman, before finally settling on a deal, he began to tell me that this was a secret family technique that had been handed down from generation to generation. It lasted for another 20 minutes, because Max is a man of a completely different kind, and in general, to give him such knowledge is almost a betrayal of the family. At one point the guy just couldn't stand it, stopped him and asked him again how much the service would cost. Considering how valuable it all was, William decided not to be modest and named a very round sum of 300 liang, just for one of his skills. In response, Max just laughed at him and said that the maximum he could offer was 10 liang. In case of refusal he would just leave. As the school was in huge debts, the mater simply had no opportunity to be there. But he warned the boy in advance that for such a price, the training would last only 1 day and it was far from certain that he would succeed, because this practice required great spiritual strength. If Max agreed to these terms, he could go with the master to the training ground right now and start the learning process. In fact, he was well aware that it would take at least 6 days to fully learn this skill, and he was in anticipation that the guy would come back and pay more. At the very beginning of the training, William asked the boy to memorize that the essence of the dust-raising skill was to wrap the dust in true qi and throw it. This would help him understand the theory of this technique. In the process of training, the system sent a new notification with an interesting suggestion. It is for only 5 points. Instantly unlock the skill of raising dust and immediately master it. Not thinking long, Max agreed, and you could say that his training was completely finished. When he informed the master about it, he was shocked, to say the least, and was sure 100% that the guy is just bluffing. Because no one has ever been able to master a technique of this level in less than 6 days, and that to achieve such a result, a person must be a true warrior who perfectly knows how to use his qi. At the same time, the system sends a new notification to the guy, in which he informs that the head of the school doubts in Max's amazing natural data, so it would be nice to prove the opposite to him on a visual example. In principle, the guy was not against it, but decided to do it in a special way, and demonstrated not on a mannequin, but directly on his teacher. In the end, the technique was performed so perfectly that the man no longer allowed himself to open his mouth, and silently sat in the corner, and had no complaints about Max for the successful completion of the task. The kid received 2 more points, and thus almost returned half of the cost of unlocking the skill. When the guy went outside, he was just madly happy, because he realized that just one descent from the mountain, he was already able to learn one good technique. Now you can go home with a clear conscience and a little nap to gain strength for the next tasks. But as it turned out later, the adventure does not end there. The very guys who thought Max was somehow sick finally waited for the perfect moment and intercepted him in the woods to do their dirty deeds, namely to try to take away all the remaining money. Max looked through the system to see who he was dealing with, and realized that in front of him at the moment was a master of martial arts of the first rank. In order to at least a little mock his opponent, the guy fell to his knees and began to pretend as if he was not going to fight back. After seeing this, the robbers immediately relaxed, and no longer felt any danger, but only an anticipation of easy money. But in reality, the guy was waiting for the perfect moment to test his new technique on real gangsters. As soon as the opportunity arose, he immediately jumped out of his seat and ran to attack. In the end, the new skill worked more than well, and with just a single swing of his foot, the 3 bandits were lying on the floor, crying at how much their eyes hurt. But even being in such a sad position for themselves, they came up with the idea to threaten and say that in the future they will definitely find Max and take revenge for such a despicable act. Frankly speaking, the guy really did not like that they are so loud about it, so he thought that it would be good to take their lives right now. The first thing, he pulled a little intrigue, and then immediately began to carry out the plan. In the end, the sum total for these 3 guys, our hero received only 4 points of experience. Their lives were as cheap as possible, and meaningless in this world. The next day, despite his day off, Max had to wake up very early because Victor had come to visit. He wasn't exactly thrilled about it at first, but then he remembered that a guy would never come this early without a good reason, so he had to be sympathetic. But unfortunately this time, instead of some serious reason, Victor said that he just wanted to take Max to some good place. Of course, instead of agreeing and just starting to pack, our hero slammed the doors in his face and said he wasn't going anywhere, because he was just too sleepy to sleep. Even despite this categorical attitude, Victor did not lose hope and began to tell that in the place where they would go there would be delicious food and beautiful girls. And then the system sent a notification in which it said that Victor was a decent man and should not refuse him in this case. In general, Max assumed that his friend just fell in love with some girl, and is shy to go to such an event, so for the sake of his own happiness, he decided to get up and slowly start to gather. Also, for completed tasks from the system, he received another point. Upon arrival at the venue, Max was finally disappointed in this event, and again tried to refuse, because he immediately realized that he would have nothing to do there. But Victor was extremely serious, and in no case was not going to let him just like that. Well, as much as Max didn't want to go, it seemed like a hopeless situation, so we'd have to take this unique opportunity as a chance to get to know more of the new people in the world. Victor wanted to go to this party so badly that he couldn't say no. He took Max to the very center of the city before he started to have a full rest, and gradually began to introduce him to everyone he knew, but in the course of the conversation something went not quite according to plan. Victor began to list all the best qualities of his companion, and said that he was definitely worthy of being a member of an influential family. Then the guy began to gradually realize the purpose of Victor's bringing him here, namely to have a blind date with the daughter of a very respectable man named Boris. Recently, he openly stated that he was looking for a worthy candidate for his daughter, so Victor decided not to waste time and brought his friend. By the way, this girl's name is Maria, and if from behind she still looks more or less than from the front, along with her terrible character, she does not deserve the attention of any adequate man. Despite the fact that she and Max were not even acquainted yet, she had already managed to call him not the most pleasant words. As soon as Maria came closer, she immediately held out her hand, not for the guy to take it, but to put on it the present he had brought her on the first day of their acquaintance. Of course, Max didn't understand what the gesture meant, so she decided to ask him directly where her present was. Frankly speaking, he had never met such impudent women in his life, and he didn't even know what to say to this request. Then William came to Victor and told him that Maxim was not suitable for her, because he was just an ordinary guard, and didn't even think of taking a present. Despite the fact that this girl is far from being a gift, Max was insanely upset by the fact that he was considered a beggar and looked down on. It happened because he was also bullied in his previous life, saying that he would never get a promotion, and so on. It's definitely going to be different this time around. Having gathered courage, the guy raised his head and asked these majors why they thought he didn't have a present for the first acquaintance. The girl's brother was just sure that it was another bluff, so he said that if Max really had something worthwhile, he would call him whatever the guy wanted to call him. In that case, without wasting a minute, Max took out a jade bracelet from his pocket and said that he wanted his brother and Maria to call him Papa, because it was the same as father, but no one knew it in this world. In principle, the guys didn't mind, because in their heads the word daddy sounded just like a nickname. In the end, they just stood in one place for several minutes, and thanked their daddy nonstop for such a serious gift. But nevertheless, Marina still reminded Max that the chances of becoming her husband were extremely slim, because there was already a whole line of very rich and handsome men lined up there. It turned out to be not even a blind date, but some kind of charity event where all willing men come and just give their valuables to some girl just because she has a very powerful father. By the way, for such an act, our hero received 3 more experience points. At least some benefit from this event still managed to get. Meanwhile, the brother of this girl was just delighted, and immediately began to set her up to continue to communicate with this guy, and get as much money out of him as possible. When suddenly some new beautiful lady appeared on the horizon, and to be frank, she was mildly displeased that so many people were gathered in this place. For some reason, Victor got pretty confused, and said they'd better get out of here as soon as they could. Because it's his third mentor who has incredible power, and to put it mildly, it's undesirable to cross paths with her when she's not in the best mood. At the same moment, some guy runs up to the guys and immediately starts praising them for the way they skillfully dealt with that annoying couple and made them say the word daddy. In general, this boy's name is Alex, and he admitted that he has been admiring Max's activities for a long time, so he came to get to know him better, a so-called fan. Also, Victor apologized for the fact that this trip to the event ended with the fact that the guy had to give such a precious bracelet. But he is by no means upset, because money can always be earned, spent, and then earned again. It's a consumable, so you shouldn't worry so much about it. When it came to work, Alex said that if the guy was interested, he had something to offer about it. Max thought it would be a good idea to listen to his application. The job is to escort convicts from the cell to the court and vice versa. The payment for this kind of activity is 2 tons of silver. Alex even somewhat recommends, and exactly how much is being asked, because his brother is very concerned about finding a suitable candidate, and also shares his concern. In that case, Max immediately wondered what the man who was in the position before him had done. This guy in his essence was a lone brigand who was caught in the villa one day for his countless atrocities. Also during a friendly battle, somehow he was able to destroy the elder brother from the Shan Hall, who didn't even have anything to wound. For this rash act he was punished extremely hard, and thus tried to find out about his secret techniques that he uses during battles, but to do with them he kept silent all the time, and did not say a word. At this point, the man has been handed over to the government, and is being processed. After this story, Max was not quite delighted with this profession, and did not have a strong desire to get a job, because it looks too dangerous. But nevertheless the guy agreed, because he was promised that he would always have an assistant to the owner, and there is nothing to be afraid of in fact. The same day the boy was taken to the first meeting, where he was introduced in front of the others and informed that from today he would be looking after a prisoner in a wagon for 2 tons of silver. When the prisoner was brought inside, the boy immediately felt how strong his aura was. Max had also heard that when this aura had leaked out, the regular people who had followed the criminal before had been at least excluded, and in more serious cases they had lost their lives, and none of the official disciples had shown any desire to keep an eye on him. Now it is time to decide who will accompany the prisoner this time. Since Max is only on the job for the first day, he has the right to refuse, under the pretext that he is not yet qualified enough to fully assume his duties. In the end, as it was to be expected, all high-ranking officials began to insist that Max already from today began to fulfill his duties, and to say that they are almost 100% sure that the newcomer will definitely cope, even though there were not even any preconditions to think so. In such a case, the guy still had to try to exercise his right to refuse and insist that, at least this time, someone else should accompany the prisoner instead of him. Since there were no other qualified workers available, it was necessary to ask those present what would be willing to replace the guy. Since there were no willing participants in the hall, it directly indicates that Max's right to refuse is automatically cancelled, and now, no matter how much he does not want it, he is simply obliged to sit inside and accompany the prisoner to the very end. In case of refusal, the superiors can do anything with him and not answer to the law. Then a new notice appeared in front of the guy's eyes, informing him that the prisoner was lonely, and it would be nice if Max involuntarily went inside and went with him. As soon as everyone was seated in their seats, the command to go was received, and the whole train immediately set off along the given route. Meanwhile, Max, being literally a few meters away from the bandit, gradually began to feel a strong pressure from his terrible aura. Now it became clear to him why nobody stays in this position for a long time. He sat there and felt as if he had met a tiger. It was such a wild sensation that it was hard to describe in words. After only a few minutes on the road, the bandit turned to the guy and asked if he had scared him by any chance. Maxim didn't even know if he should answer, but one thing he knew for sure was that he was scared out of his mind at the moment, and he was trying his best not to show it. The system also sent a new notification, in which it informed him that the reward for the completed task was 10 points. This prisoner is so strong that the guy can only withstand his pressure by using the skill of the Great River. The man then started talking about Maxim getting closer to him, because if he talks from afar, the pressure of the aura will turn him to mush. Honestly, sounds kind of lame. Does the closer you are to the prisoner, the less pressure there will be. But in any case, it's worth a try because it's already too strong, and the Great River skill simply can't resist for long, after which the guy will turn to mush anyway. As soon as Max got close enough, the bandit attacked him with his magic. Trying to approach him was really quite stupid, but now you have to think how to get out of this situation. Then the system sent a new notification, with a hint on how to save yourself. In general, this big guy is chronically sleep-deprived, and the best option at this point is to exchange his experience points for an appropriate item and generous help. The first thing to take is a coarse cloth pillow, the second sleep powder, and the third a small picture book for counting sheep. At the very last moment, Max decided to buy only sleeping powder, improve the skill of the Great River, and combine it all with the skill of raising dust. In his opinion, this is just the perfect formula for salvation. Finally, the system started to do something useful for its protagonist, not just offer something to improve it. The funny thing about this situation is that the people who are outside are probably just driving and waiting for the guy to lose his life in the wagon, because they don't react at all to the noise. But that's okay, because Max is already in anticipation of what kind of faces they will have when this trip is over. The guys who were outside heard this and were already sure that he had finally lost his life and would never be able to stop them from realizing their plans again. The guys who were on the street heard this and were already sure that he had finally lost his life and would never again be able to prevent the realization of their plans. When the boy began to gradually regain consciousness, he had only a few minutes left until the bandit began to sleep sweetly. He had to try to find out as much information as possible about the prisoner's secret techniques. Since right now, The bandit is in such a state that he can't even see who is standing in front of him. It shouldn't be too difficult to lure out some information. During the story, it was about a secret technique called Rotten Fist, and the system immediately offered to learn it for 15 points. The guy was well aware of how powerful this ability was, so without too much thought he agreed, and happily invested his points. But now there was another problem. Max wanted to use this power so badly that he could hardly restrain himself not to hit the prisoner. But the interrogation wasn't over yet, so it was definitely too early to attack. Since this man had a technique like Rotten Fist, it was likely that he also had many other things, such as jewelry and so on. After a few more minutes of talking, the guy finally opened the door and went outside. All those who wished the guy to stay there forever were, to put it mildly, shocked, and even began to uncontrollably not nice expressions, but those who wished only the best, on the contrary, were very happy about his return and immediately ran to hug, because if he came out of there, it means he has great potential. This chubby uncle named Murat was even ready to kick out one of his main assistants, to put in his place Max, and further ensure a simply gorgeous future. But our hero cannot just give up everything and allow himself to go to this organization. Because all his conscious life he grew up in the villa and will always be loyal to it, even if he is just used and loses his life, it will not change his opinion. Well, in that case, Murat said that for the work done he would reward Max with 10 tons of silver, and his assistant also added 15 more. This is just great news, because now our hero again has just a huge amount of money, on which he can safely live and absolutely nothing to deny himself. In general, everyone was insanely happy, except for those two haters who never managed to realize their dirty plans. That very evening, when everything was over, Max took the map with him, and went to the place where the prisoner had hidden his jewelry. If he told the truth, then all the things must be somewhere here. But it was unlikely that he would lie in that situation. The guy was sure that it was worth a little effort, and everything would be found. Further, because our hero too much stared at the screen of the system, he did not notice the nearby lying cheetah and accidentally stepped on his tail, thereby waking him up and very angry. In order to somehow escape in this situation, immediately began to run away, throwing in him sleeping powder and everything else. In a strong panic, he even threw out his map, which depicted the place where the treasure was located. The situation was as critical as possible, and the guy did not even roughly understand what to do, but then suggested that it would be a good idea to jump into the bushes and try to hide there for a while. But as it turned out later, it was not exactly bushes, but a real cliff, into which the guy fell at full speed, and a good so fell right on his back. The most important thing that he did not break anything, because taking into account the cheetah, you can say that he will definitely lose his life because he cannot run. The pain was maddening, but after a few minutes it began to subside. Then he looked around and noticed a building in front of him that looked very much like the temple the prisoner had told him about, and if it was true, the cheetah would be a happy accident. He decided not to linger long, and went inside, looking around very carefully, so as not to fall into some trap. After a little analyzing everything he saw around him, he concluded that someone had already tried to take the treasures from here, but they had failed. Because this statue is impenetrable and requires a special approach. Our hero managed to master the skill called Rotten Fist, and right now he uses it to destroy this armored statue. In the end, after such a powerful blow from her, just nothing remained, and in front of the guy appeared not a large chest. As soon as Max opened it, he immediately found in front of him golden leaves that cost an incredible amount of money, and there are about 10 of them here, and next to them was some other vial that looked like a medicine. Even the system was not able to determine what it was for free, so it suggested spending as much as 20 points to get the exact information. For now, we will have to put this matter on hold, and deal with something simpler, namely this pile of money. The plan as usual is quite simple: go around the city, and help everyone in need, while earning a large number of experience points and raise your prestige in the neighborhood.